Mort comes from Latin words meaning to die and death. A mortuary is a place where dead bodies are kept until burial, and a post-mortem examination is one conducted on a recently dead body. The Latin phrase memento mori means remember that you must die, so a memento mori is the name we give to a reminder of death. The skulls you can find carved on gravestones in old cemeteries are examples. Mortality: 1. The quality or state of being alive and therefore certain to die. 2. The number of deaths that occur in a particular time or place. Mortality rates were highest among those who lived closest to the plant. Young people tend to assume they will never die, but a person's sense of his or her mortality generally increases year by year, and often increases greatly after a serious accident or illness. Still, many people refuse to change behaviors that would improve their chances of living into old age. Mortality rates are calculated by government agencies, insurance companies, and medical researchers. Infant mortality rates, the rate at which infants die in childbirth, provide a good indicator of a country's overall health. In recent years, the rates in countries like Iceland, Singapore, and Japan have been much better than in the US. Moribund: 1. In the process of dying or approaching death. 2. Inactive or becoming outmoded. Church attendance in Britain has fallen in recent years, but no one would say the Anglican Church is moribund. Moribund is still sometimes used in its original literal sense of approaching death, but it's much more often used to describe things. When the economy goes bad, we hear about moribund mills and factories and towns. The economy itself may even be called moribund. Critics may speak of the moribund state of poetry, or lament the moribund record or newspaper industry. Amortize: to pay off, something such as a mortgage, by making small payments over a period of time. For tax purposes, they chose to amortize most of the business's startup costs over a 3-year period. Amortize is most common as a legal term, and many of us first come across it when we take out a mortgage or start a business. Financial officers and tax lawyers can choose how to legally amortize various types of business expenses, some of which may seem much better than others. In mortgage amortization, much of what you pay month by month is actually interest on the mortgage debt, especially at the beginning. So what does amortizing have to do with death? Basically, to amortize a debt means to kill it slowly over time. Mortify: 1. To subdue or deaden the body, especially by self-discipline or self-inflicted pain. 2. To embarrass greatly. Our 14-year-old is mortified whenever he sees us dancing, especially if any of his school friends are around. Mortify once actually meant put to death, but no longer. Its deadened sense is most familiar to us in the phrase mortifying the flesh, which refers to a custom once followed by devout Christians, who would starve themselves, deprive themselves of every comfort, and even whip themselves in order to subdue their bodily desires and punish themselves for their sins. But the most common use of mortify today is the humiliate sense. Its connection with death is still apparent when we speak of dying of embarrassment. Trough comes from the Greek trophy, meaning nourishment. This particular trough root doesn't show up in many everyday English words. The trough in words like trophy, apostrophe, and catastrophe has a different meaning, but instead tends to appear in scientific terms. Atrophy: 1. Gradual loss of muscle or flesh, usually because of disease or lack of use. 2. A decline or degeneration. After a month in a hospital bed, my father required a round of physical therapy to deal with his muscular atrophy. From its literal Greek roots, atrophy would mean basically lack of nourishment. Although the English word doesn't usually imply any lack of food, it always refers to a wasting away. Those who have been bedridden for a period of time will notice that their muscles have atrophied. And muscular atrophy is a frequent result of such diseases as cancer and AIDS. We also use atrophy in a much more general sense. After being out of work a few years, you may find your work skills have atrophied. Someone who's been living an isolated life may discover the same thing about his or her social skills, and a democracy can atrophy when its citizens cease to pay attention to how they're being governed. Hypertrophy: 1. Excessive development of an organ or part. 2. Exaggerated growth or complexity. Opponents claimed that the Defense Department, after years of being given too much money by the Congress, was now suffering from hypertrophy. When the prefix hyper dash above, beyond, see hyper, is joined to trophy, we get the opposite of atrophy. An organ or part becomes hypertrophic when it grows so extremely that its function is affected. Muscle hypertrophy is common in men who do strength training, and is often harmless, but extreme muscle hypertrophy generally involves taking steroids, which can do great damage to the body. Hypertrophy of the heart sounds as if it might be healthy, but instead it's usually a bad sign. As the example sentence shows, hypertrophy, like atrophy, can be used in non-medical ways as well. Dystrophy, any of several disorders involving the nerves and muscles, especially muscular dystrophy. The most common of the muscular dystrophies affects only males, who rarely live to the age of 40. Since the prefix dys means bad or difficult, see dys, dystrophy is always a negative term. Originally it meant a condition caused by improper nutrition, but today the term is instead used for a variety of other conditions, particularly conditions that noticeably affect the muscles. Of the many types of muscular dystrophy, the best known is Duchenne's, a terrible disease that strikes about 1 in 3,300 males and produces severe wasting of the muscles. However, the muscular dystrophies generally affect many other organs and systems as well. And the other dystrophies, which tend to involve the eyes or hands, don't much resemble the muscular dystrophies.